Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, the Christmas lights are back on in Bethlehem.
For many here, the celebrations, the lighting of the tree after making a prayer for peace was more of an SOS, telling the world that Bethlehem is open for business.
For the first time since 2022, the celebrations return, even as life across the occupied West Bank grows harder. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Before we get to my interview for today, remember to leave us a comment telling us what you think about this episode, whether you're in Bethlehem or anywhere else. And if you're listening to this on your podcast app, leave us a review telling us where you're listening from, and feel free to drop a 5-star rating while you're there. It really helps the show.
My name is Faris Abraham. I was born and raised in Bethlehem in Palestine, and I lead Levant Ministries here in the U.S. and across the Middle East.
Well, Reverend Dr. Faris Abraham, welcome to The Take. It is so good to have you. We are approaching Christmas, and you were raised in Jesus's birthplace.
Yes.
Growing up just outside the occupied West Bank city of Bethlehem. There hasn't been a whole lot to celebrate there recently, with Israel's genocidal war in Gaza and near daily Israeli military raids in the West Bank. But this month, for the first time since 2022, there was a little joy as people gathered outside of the Church of Nativity to watch the lighting of a giant Christmas tree.
Yes.
What did that feel like for you?
Well, to be completely honest, Malika, I had mixed emotions. On one hand, I felt deep gratitude. Christmas in Bethlehem means resilience to so many people of its residents. It means people are still holding on to hope. On the other hand, it's impossible to separate celebration from the pain and suffering surrounding everyone in the area, especially in Gaza. For many families in Bethlehem, Christmas is happening alongside loss, economic hardships, and deep uncertainty and fear. That's why I was so glad to see the tree lit again in Major Square and to see people returning to Bethlehem. And you know, Malika, at the very heart of the Christmas story is this truth, that in the middle of despair and oppression, when humanity seemed lost, God entered our world to redeem us and to offer hope. The very first Christmas that took place in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago looked very much like what we are living today in Palestine, whether in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, in Gaza, or even in proper Israel. Roman occupation, violent rulers, hopelessness filled the land, and into that reality, a child was born in a manger, marginalized, overlooked. And remember, it was in Bethlehem that Herod, the violent ruler, killed innocent children because he feared for his political life. So when Bethlehem celebrates today, it's not out of comfort. It is not about pretending everything is fine. It's about saying and declaring to the entire world that our Christian faith still matters even when life is so fragile.
But the celebrations in Manger Square this year seem to be more subdued. And of course, that makes sense because they come on the heels of a very fragile ceasefire in Gaza, in which Israeli attacks continue, and these harsh winter storms that have caused the humanitarian situation there to worsen. Now, I know that your wife is from Gaza, home to one of the oldest Christian communities in the world.
Yes.
And she still has family there, right? How have they been faring?
It's been very difficult. Past 2 years have been heavy. People are really barely holding on hope. So we have extended family there. They've lived through what all Palestinians in Gaza have lived through, a really ruthless, brutal war that has taken the lives of many people. Over 20,000 children have been slaughtered and killed. All the homes have been leveled to the ground. And the Christian community have also been devastated by this war. All three churches, the Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, and the Gaza Baptist Church. This is actually where my wife was born and grew up. She grew up in Gaza Baptist Church. And not too many people know that Baptists have made it all the way to Gaza. But they have also, endured, like all Palestinians have endured, great loss and pain and suffering. And they've lost Many people, innocent women and children, who were sheltering at the church, including my wife's extended family.
Mm. Well, even though this land is the birthplace of Christianity and cities like Bethlehem and Nazareth are so important to the Christmas story,
yes,
the number of Christians has dropped dramatically over the past 20 years. What did it used to be like to celebrate Christmas there, and how has that changed over the years?
Well, to start with the data, the picture is clear. In the early 20th century, Christians made up roughly 10 to 12% of the population of historic Palestine. Today, Christians are about 1 to 2%. That's a dramatic decline in one generation. So what's important to keep in mind is that this decline did not happen evenly across the region. It accelerates whenever or wherever life becomes unsustainable. And since 1967, following the Israeli military occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, Christian immigration has steadily increased alongside, I want to say, Muslim immigration. Both communities are affected by the same of what I call structural pressures. And these pressures are real. They affect communities and they force people to be displaced and immigrate. And these include restriction of freedom, freedom of movement, land confiscations, settlement expansion, economic instability, repeated cycle of violence, and uncertainty about the future. So in places like Bethlehem, where the economy depends heavily on tourism, every closure, every checkpoint, or every conflict pushes family closer to leaving.
Well, you mentioned the structural problems that so many people in the occupied West Bank and in Gaza face. And just down the road from Bethlehem is another town that's tied to the Christmas story. It's where you're from, Beit Sahur, one of the last majority Christian towns in the occupied West Bank.
Yes.
And you recently wrote about the town in an op-ed for al-Jazeera.com. You explained how Israeli settlers set up an illegal outpost on land the Palestinian community had planned for public projects like a children's hospital. What else should we know about Beit Sahur and what's happening there?
So Beit Sahur is a Palestinian Christian city just east of Bethlehem. It's one of the few remaining majority Christian towns in the Holy Land. And it's known as the place of the shepherds in the Christmas story. People there genuinely see themselves as carrying that story forward. You know, when I moved to the U.S. for college, my classmate used to call me the shepherd boy. and they meant it jokingly.
For those who did not go to Bible study or are not Christian, tell us about the shepherds. Why is that integral to the story?
Yeah, the shepherds were ordinary people in the Christmas story, poor, marginalized, young men and women out in the field. And all of a sudden, the angel of the Lord appeared to them and pronounced the birth of Jesus. And they were the first one to show up at the manger and to welcome Jesus into the world. They were marginalized, they said, outcast with no power, yet they were the first to hear the good news. And that story still defines Beit Sahur today. It reminds us that hope does not belong in palaces or halls of power. It begins with ordinary people on the margins. And that's why, as you mentioned earlier, that there's this illegal Israeli settler outpost being built on Beit Sahur properties, built on the land that belongs to the local families. And the Christian mayor of Beit Sahur, Dr. Ilyas Said, has written an appeal warning that this outpost would literally divide the city, cut it off from its eastern side, and expose its residents to increased settler violence, which has been on the rise, leading to further displacement. And let me put it this way, if the shepherds are pushed out today, we lose more than a town. We lose the living witness to the very heart of the Christmas story.
Well, I want to pick up on that because I wonder what it means for a community, a Christian community in the birthplace of Christianity, to lose land intended to heal children, especially in a place so closely tied to the story of shepherds and care.
It's devastating because it will make life much harder than what it is right now. As you may know, Malika, there are checkpoints and Israeli posts inside the West Bank, which makes movement extremely difficult. Young families, young people who desire to just live ordinary life, find jobs, build a house, get married, have children. Beit Sahur sits on very limited property and it's surrounded by Israeli settlements and Israeli roads. So cutting off that piece of property would definitely diminish the city, its identity, and will risk further displacement. And this is the biggest fear that we as Christians fear the most, that the land will be emptied of its Christian presence in Palestine.
I'll be back with Reverend Faris Abraham after the break. Reverend Faris, you have written a lot about how the Christian communities in the Middle East are often overlooked by Christians in the West, as if the Christianity in Palestine is a past tense thing, when in fact there is a small but very present community there now.
Yes.
Why do you think that is?
Christian communities in the Arab world in general, just Palestine, are often overlooked for few reasons. And first, much of it is ignorance, I would say, not malice. Many Christians in the West have been taught to view Israel, Palestine, and the broader Middle East through a political lens, or maybe through a touristic lens, rather than a gospel lens. Many people come on organized trips, follow a set itinerary, visit famous sites, but never meet a Palestinian, never sit with a local Christian family, and never step into an indigenous church to worship. Yet there are vibrant, historic Christian communities, not only in Israel and Palestine, but also in Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, and across the region. So it's important to see the ancient stones. I agree with that. I understand that. But too often people admire the stones and miss the living stones, the Christians who have carried the gospel continuously, Malika, for 2,000 years. But perhaps another thing that came to mind is the theology, a theology that assumes that peace in the region is impossible, that the Middle East is destined for perpetual war. That belief makes peacemaking feel pointless, right? But yet Jesus commands us and tells us, blessed are the peacemakers. And he even entrusted his followers with the ministry of reconciliation. So as Christians, we are not called to accept endless conflict as God's plan. We are called to pursue peace and justice for all people in the region. And the global church has a vital role to play, not as spectators of prophecy, but as agents of reconciliation. So we're praying for peace. We're praying for the peace of Jerusalem, but that does not mean accepting the destruction of Gaza. Loving the Jewish people does not mean withholding love and compassion from Muslims. You see, true faith refuses false choices. The Christian message insists on dignity and justice and peace for everyone who calls the Holy Land home.
Reverend Faris, I hear what you're saying. And I also know how people are. Do you get called, as ironic as it might be, anti-Semitic?
Well, how can I be anti myself? I'm Semitic myself. My ancestors lived in that land for generations, especially Palestinian Christians, who have lived and prayed and worshiped in that land since the time of Jesus. So we're the extension of the first church. And when people call me that, I don't understand, because God is for all people, regardless of who they are, their faith, their background, and for their beliefs and their color. That's what the Bible teaches us as Christians. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son.
It's a beautiful answer. And what I hear in that is that, yes, you do. And yes, you do get pushback. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. Especially when we talk about issues of justice for the Palestinians. When we talk about peace for the Israelis, everybody welcomes that. Peace and safety for the Jewish people. But when we talk about peace and justice for the Palestinians, sometimes we get pushbacks. But the church is started to seeing a different narrative, started to hearing the stories of those who live those realities. We're not a footnote in their political story. We're real living stones of that land who have carrying the gospel for 2,000 years.
Reverend Faddis, you wrote a piece for the magazine Church Leaders called "As We Sing About Bethlehem, Let's Not Ignore Her." And in that piece, you called out the fact that some 1,000 U.S. pastors traveled to Jerusalem for a Friends of Zion Ambassador Summit for 4 days this month, but they didn't visit Bethlehem in the occupied West Bank. Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, spoke at that event saying these pastors should go back to their churches and spread the message that to be pro-Bible is to be pro-Israel.
It is time for us to simply be biblical. That's what it is. It's not to be pro-Israel, it's to be pro-biblical. And when you're pro-Bible, you will find your voice to be pro-Israel.
I wonder what your reaction to that is. How do you process that?
Well, God is not pro-Israel. God is not pro-Palestine. God is pro-peace. That's the God we worship. That's the biblical God we worship. But the most striking thing for me was, as a Christian, very specifically and very troubling, was on the summit's website. The 1,000 pastors were explicitly instructed not to share the gospel or speak about their faith while in Israel. They were told to remain silent. And that immediately brought to mind a powerful passage from the book of Acts, chapter 5, when the religious authorities and religious leaders in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago brought Peter and the other disciples and ordered them not to speak in the name of Jesus in Jerusalem. Of course, they didn't listen. The irony here is very hard to miss. In this summit that just took place earlier this month, pastors were being told by the organizers not to speak about Jesus in the very land where he was born, where he was crucified, and where he rose from the dead. So instead, they were instructed to listen to military briefings, hear from Israeli politicians, and then return to the United States, return home, and be advocates for the state of Israel. For me, that posture fundamentally delegitimized the entire conference or the entire summit. When Christian leaders are told to silence the gospel and replace it with political messaging, something has gone deeply wrong here. That's not Christian witness. That's political instrumentalization of faith.
Your piece was so poetically written and talked about how, especially at this time of year, people do sing about and sing the praises of the beautiful land and of Bethlehem. What responses have you gotten, if any, to the piece, telling people not to forget the actual place and the people?
Yes. There was actually an outpouring of support among many evangelical pastors, I should say. Many of them reached out to say thank you for naming something they felt but they had never articulated. So there was a great deal of support for that, because all around U.S. churches right now and all around the world, they sing about the little town of Bethlehem. But it's an imagined Bethlehem. The manger scene, peaceful. You have the shepherds there. You have the animals surrounding the manger, Joseph and Mary. But the backstory to the manger story is very bloody. It's very violent. You had a ruthless politician who killed innocent children. And that very much resembles what is taking place now in Palestine. Many people are losing their lives. They're losing their livelihoods. Their freedoms are being taken away. They're being detained for no charges in Israeli prisons. And that status quo cannot sustain. It has to be resolved.
You've had firsthand experience with the violence of the Israeli occupation. You've called it a defining childhood moment when snipers in an Israeli military vehicle opened fire on your family, and your mother acted quickly to keep you safe by putting herself in harm's way.
Yes.
And I know that you've said in the past that it is your faith that drives you to forgiveness. You choose forgiveness. When you think about all you've lived through and all you've just told me about the reality for people there now, how do you reflect on that choice to choose forgiveness? Does it have to happen every single day? Do you have to wake up and decide every single day that's what you choose?
That was in 1990 during the first Intifada. She survived it. She got the bullet in the back and exit wound in the front. It was very deadly. Almost lost her life, lost a lot of blood. I was 10 years old at that time. And but thank God she's alive and well, and she's a committed Christian, and she just continues to teach us to love our enemies. The fact is that Jesus taught this message, and he said, "Love your enemy, pray for those who persecute you." The context of that, Malika, is people were living under Roman occupation, ruthless Roman occupation. So in that context, Jesus is telling his followers to do the same thing. But in the meantime, as a citizen, as a human being, I have to speak for the defenseless. I have to share my story. Yes, my heart does not hold any bitterness or resentment. Otherwise, it's going to translate into violence. So this is what we need to teach our children, that violence generates violence and the cycle has to end. But that doesn't mean that justice is brushed aside. There is peace, there is justice, and that we need to be actively pursuing.
Reverend Dr. Faris Abraham, thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you.